So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob." "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." And the sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Okay, so good morning. Most of the points that I will be sharing with you today regarding the Torah portion comes from a really good podcast that I heard on the life of Jacob by Michael Durham. And his podcast is called Real Truth Matters, or RTM. So I would really encourage you to look it up, Do You Want to Wrestle? RTM, or Real Truth Matters podcast, and listen to it for yourself. It's very good. So Jacob is a very interesting patriarch, okay? He's different, okay? Peculiar even, you might say. He's not really the kind of guy that you would expect in a great patriarch of the faith. He doesn't seem to have the strong faith of Abraham or the willingness and obedience of Isaac when Abraham was tested. Instead, Jacob was a deceiver and a wrestler. All his life, he struggled and strove to gain ascendancy in almost every relationship and every circumstance. Whatever he achieved in life, he did so by his own grit and scheming and manipulation. Jacob means he grasps the heel, which is a Hebrew idiom for he who deceives. He deceives. So Jacob's greatest strength was his cunning and the ability to flee when things got too hot to handle. Also, Jacob's encounter with God was also very different from Abraham's and Isaac's encounter with God. Jacob wrestled God. So how do we know it was the Lord? Well, as we just read, Jacob says, "I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." But not only was Jacob's encounter one of wrestling God, but also of being wounded by God. That's right, wounded by God. God touched his hip socket and put it out of joint, so that Jacob walked with a limp the rest of his life, actually. So, like I said, different. Everything about Jacob is quite unexpected. So, why did God wound Jacob? Well, knowing what we know about Jacob, the deceiver and the escapist, God wounded Jacob where he was the strongest. And by strong here, I mean strong in his own strength. Now, like Jacob, herein lies an equally different and unexpected theology that we're not used to hearing about. One that may seem odd to some and overly harsh to others. But nevertheless, it is true. God wounds his children. We don't often think of God in this way. We don't expect the wound of God. We think he heals, not wounds. We think he helps and not hurts. We all want God to show up in times of trouble, but sometimes God shows up and he is the trouble. From time to time, when necessary, the Lord will apply his touch not to heal, but to wound. And God does this with every one of his children, his real children. He does it to purge things from our lives, like deception and scheming and manipulative lies that hinder our communion with him. And he does it to keep us from self-reliance and from trusting in our own false sense of strength. It's hard. That's a hard truth and a harder experience. Another reason God wounded Jacob was because anytime Jacob was afraid or in serious trouble, he would always run away. Okay, when he stole Esau's blessing, his first decision was to run for his life. When he feared Laban, his father-in-law, the text says he stole away and fled with all that he had. And in Genesis 32, in our Torah portion for today, Jacob is yet again afraid. He is afraid of Esau. He was about to confront the brother whose blessing he stole. Would this be a meeting or would it be a massacre? And so you can already see Jacob's escapist mentality already strategizing some plan to elude Esau, to flee from Esau. It says that he divided his people into two companies, and Jacob said if Esau attacks one company, then the other can escape and can run away, basically. That's strategizing Jacob, right? But that night, God touched Jacob's plan so that Jacob couldn't run again. In fact, he would never run again because for the rest of his life, he would walk with a limp. God wrestled with Jacob to confront his fears and to not rely on his own cunning, his own strategy, his own strength. God took care of Jacob. And actually, he did more than just protect him from Esau. God reconciled Esau with Jacob. Okay? It says, but Esau ran to meet Jacob, and he embraced him and threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept together. Which, of course, by the way, is a foreshadowing to Joseph, who also will reconcile with his brothers later and weep with them. Thirdly, God wounded Jacob so that he might bless him. So that he might bless him. Indeed, it is a blessing to be wounded by God. Or rather, it comes with a bigger and a better blessing. Michael Durham says that it isn't until the man or woman of God has been broken that he or she is ready to be used by God. This is the way of God. He'll not have you or me running in our own strength. Not only will he not have us do our will in our own power, but he won't have us trying to do his will in our power, in our own strength. Should I say that one again? Okay. He'll not have you or me running in our own strength. Not only will he not have us do our will in our own power, but he won't let us try to do his will in our own strength and in our own power. God wounds to remind us that we need him. That it is not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord. And in fact, this was a constant, continual message that God was teaching all Israel throughout her entire history. And one of those great lessons came through a shepherd boy when he slew a giant warrior with a mere slingshot. David says, now everyone will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you over into my hands. Also, you think of Moses, right? He didn't deliver Israel out of Egypt by sword or spear or human strength and strategy, right? But by God's Spirit, by his hand. And even when Israel did fight as warriors, right, the mighty men of Joshua, God made sure that they knew their success was not a result of their human strength or force, but because of him, because he granted them success, because he had given their enemy into their hand. And from time to time, again, when it was absolutely necessary, God taught Israel this lesson by many wounds and many afflictions. Come, let us return to the Lord. Why? because he has torn us to pieces, but he will heal us. He has wounded us, but he will bind up our wounds. It's Hosea 6:1. And indeed, out of the wounding came a greater healing, in fact, as well as a bigger and better blessing every time. However, no son or daughter of God has ever experienced God's wounding like the Son of God. From that great wounding emerged the greatest blessing for all of God's children. By those wounds, we are healed. And that is the Messianic hope that I believe that this peculiar patriarch glimpsed and wrestled with. And perhaps it took someone so different and unexpected like Jacob to wrestle with such a different and unexpected strategy of God. After all, this is something to indeed wrestle with, okay? For how can healing come out of wounding? Or hope out of hurt? Life out of death? How can my God, why have you forsaken me, be reconciled with it pleased the Lord to crush him? That is a peculiar strategy to take, paradoxical even. But sometimes God does things very differently, okay? And we are the better for it. His ways are higher than our ways. And the weakness of God, listen to this, the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. Moreover, the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom and cunning. So, it is right that Jacob and all his descendants should be called Israel, right? He who wrestles with God. To wrestle with God to wrestle with such a God is to take God's ways seriously. It is to take the gospel seriously. To wrestle with God and even be wounded by him is to be his child. And to wrestle with God is to come out with a far greater blessing on the other side. Shabbat shalom.